Welcome, wanderer. Tonight, the Firefly carries us across the water to a small Greek island where the sea has a long memory, and the old stories have never quite stopped being true. A woman who has lived her whole life on this shore, a 6-year-old son who still believes in everything, and something ancient caught in the rocks of a quiet cove, waiting for someone to remember. Some things are not lost, only forgotten. And sometimes all it takes to find them again is a child who runs home to fetch his mother. Settle in and let the Firefly guide you gently into the world of Thalia and Nikos and the Nereids Cove. There is a particular quality to light on a Greek island into hour before noon. Not the blazing, indifferent light of midday, but something softer and more considered. The kind of light that seems to arrive with intention, that pools in the hollows of old stone walls and turns a surface of the sea into something that resembles a dream more than water. It is the light that Thalia had grown up inside, the way other people grow up inside languages or songs. She did not think about it. It was simply this atmosphere of her life, the particular color of every morning she had ever known. She was kneading bread when Nikos came running. She heard him before she saw him, his feet on the path outside, that particular rhythm she had memorized without meaning to. The small, urgent percussion of a 6-year-old in a hurry. Then the door, flung open with more force than a child that size should have been able to manage, and Nikos himself, breathless and wide-eyed, his sandals leaving pale dust prints across the kitchen floor she had swept an hour ago. She did not stop kneading. She had learned in 6 years of motherhood to let him arrive at his own pace, to wait, to give him the space to find the words, because Nikos was a child who felt things before he understood them, who experienced the world in great rushing waves of sensation that took a moment to sort themselves into language. "Mama," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Mama, you have to come." She looked at him then. His eyes were enormous. Not frightened, she knew his frightened face, had catalogued every variation of it, knew the difference between the fear that needed her arms and the fear that needed her voice, and the fear that needed her simply to be present and still. This was not fear. This was something else, something she did not have a name for yet. "Come where?" she said. "The rocks," he said, "by the cove, the small one, past the old boat shed." She set the dough aside, covered it with a cloth, wiped her hands on the towel that hung from the oven handle, the one with the faded blue stripe that had been her mother's before it was hers. She did these things slowly and deliberately, not because she was not curious. She was intensely curious. Her heart was already moving toward the door before her body, but because she knew that Nikos needed her to be calm, that her calm was the shore he steered toward when the water got strange. "Show me," she said. The village of Agiopetros sat on the eastern side of a small island that most maps recorded in very small print, an afterthought of land between larger, more celebrated places. It had a harbour, a church with a blue dome, a square with 3 tables and a lemon tree, a bakery, a taverna, and approximately 240 souls who had all, in one way or another, been shaped by the particular quality of that light and the particular sound of that sea. Thalia's family had been among them for as long as anyone could remember. Longer, her grandmother had always said. Longer than the records, longer than the church, longer than the name on the map. Her grandmother, Kyria Eleni, had been a small woman with enormous hands and a memory that stretched back through her own grandmother's stories and her grandmother's before that. An unbroken chain of women who had lived on this island and known its moods the way you know the moods of someone you have loved for a very long time. Not by logic, by instinct, by the particular tilt of the light or the colour of the water, or the sound the wind made coming around the north headland. Kyria Eleni had told stories. That was what Thalia remembered most about her, sitting in the old woman's kitchen while the afternoon light moved across the floor in long golden rectangles. The stories. About the island, about the sea, about the things that lived in the sea. The old things, the ones older than the fishing boats and the church and the name on the map. The Nereids, she had called them, the sea daughters, the daughters of Nereus, the old man of the sea, who had tended these waters since before anyone had thought to write anything down. They are not like us, Kyria Eleni had said once, cracking pistachios with the heel of her hand. But they are not unlike us either. They love the sea the way we love this island. It is their home, the way this is ours. And they know us, these waters. They know when we remember them and when we forget. Thalia had been 8 or 9 years old. She had eaten the pistachios and half listened and fully believed, the way children believe things, completely, without effort, the way they breathe. She had not thought about those stories in years. The path to the small cove was one she had walked 1,000 times. Past the old boat shed, its wood bleached silver by decades of salt and sun, its door hanging at an angle that suggested it had given up on closing properly sometime in the previous century. Down the rough steps cut into the rock by someone long before her, worn smooth and slightly treacherous, the kind of steps you navigated by memory more than sight. Through the gap in the rocks that opened suddenly into the small half-moon of the cove, sheltered on 3 sides, the water inside it greener and cleaner than the open sea, the rocks around the edge draped in dark weed that moved like hair in the current. Nikos was ahead of her on the path, looking back every few steps to make sure she was following, his face caught between urgency and something she still could not name. She heard it before she rounded the last rock. A sound she had no reference for, not a voice exactly, or not only a voice. More like water deciding to become sound, like the sea pulling itself into something that resembled language, low and resonant and threaded through with harmonics that should not have been possible, that seemed to come from more directions than one at once. She rounded the rock. She stopped. The Nereid was caught in a tangle of ghost nets, the old kind, the abandoned fishing nets that drifted through the sea for years after their owners had lost them, pale and nearly invisible in the water, collecting in the rocks where the current slowed. There were always ghost nets in this cove. Thalia had pulled them out herself over the years, rolled them up and disposed of them, knowing more would come. She had never thought much about them beyond their inconvenience. She thought about them very much now. The Nereid was half in the water and half out of it, caught across her lower body where the pale net had wrapped itself in the night or the day before, tightening as she had moved, the way those nets always did, designed to catch, even when there was no longer anyone intending the catching. She was very still now, in a way that wild things go still when they understand that struggling makes it worse. Her hands rested on the rock on either side of her. Her eyes were open. Her eyes, Thalia had imagined, without knowing she had imagined it, what a Nereid's eyes would look like. She had imagined something inhuman, something cold and strange. What she found instead was something that undid her completely. Eyes the color of deep water, yes, green and shifting and full of light, but eyes that held in them something unmistakably recognizable, something that had been waiting, something that was, right now, relieved. "Mama," Nikos said very quietly beside her. He had taken her hand. She had not noticed him doing it. "I see her," Thalia said. She did not run. She did not make any sudden movement. She understood, somewhere below thought, that this moment needed to be approached the way you approach something rare and easily lost, slowly, with your hands open, with your whole body arranged into a question rather than a statement. She crossed the rocks carefully, crouched at the water's edge, looked at the net. Up close, she could see how it had wound itself. 3 or 4 loops of pale filament across the tail, tightening towards the hip. One strand caught under what she could only think of as a wrist, though the arm that ended there was something other than she had words for. Longer and more fluid, the color of sea foam and old pearl. "I am going to help you," Thalia said. She said it in Greek, simply, the way she would have said it to anyone, the way her grandmother would have said it. The Nereid looked at her, that deep water gaze, shifting, fathomless, and yet present. Here, looking back, she made a sound. It was not Greek, and it was not any language Thalia had a name for, but its meaning moved through her like warm water, like the feeling of stepping into a bath after a cold day. Something that meant, yes, please. "Nikos," Thalia said without looking away, "go back to the house. In the drawer under the sink there is a knife. The small one, the one I use for cutting string. Bring it to me. Walk carefully on the steps." "I want to stay," he said. "I know," she said. "Bring me the knife, and then you can stay. I will not do anything without you." A pause. Then his footsteps on the rock, careful, as she had asked, and the sound of him going up the path. She turned back to the Nereid. "We are going to be all right," she said. She was not entirely sure which of them she was saying it to. While she waited, she looked. She had spent 43 years on this island, and she had always believed in a comfortable, abstract way that people believe in things they have grown up hearing, that the sea was alive in ways that went beyond fish and algae, and the small crabs that lived in the rock pools, where Nikos liked to crouch for hours, watching. She had believed it the way she believed in the things her grandmother had told her. Not as fact exactly, not as something she would have argued for in a conversation with someone from the city, but as a kind of background truth, a layer of the world that existed whether or not you were paying attention to it. She was paying attention now. The Nereid was perhaps the size of a woman. Difficult to say, with her lower half in the water, the tail moving in a slow, involuntary rhythm that Thalia recognized as the way a sleeping animal breathes. Not a choice, just the body keeping itself going. Her hair was dark and very long and moved in the water around her like ink dispersing. Her face was, Thalia kept returning to this, kept finding it remarkable. Her face was a face. Not a human face exactly, too symmetrical, too still, the proportions slightly different in ways that were hard to identify specifically. But a face, with an expression, which was currently something between pain and patience. "How long?" Thalia said. She did not know why she was asking. She did not expect an answer she could understand. The Nereid looked at her, made another sound. This one moved through Thalia's chest like a low bell. She did not know how she knew what it meant. She simply did. The way you know, sometimes, what someone means before they finish speaking, because you are paying the right kind of attention. Since yesterday, it meant. Since the tide before last. "I'm sorry," Thalia said, and meant it, with a depth that surprised her. "I'm sorry it took us so long." The Nereid's expression shifted. Something in the eyes, something that might, on a human face, have been called a smile. Though it was quieter than that, older than that. "You came," it meant. Nikos came back with the knife, held carefully in both hands, point down, the way she had taught him. He was very serious about it. He handed it to her with the gravity of someone performing an important ceremony. And then he crouched beside her on the rock and looked at the Nereid with the particular openness of a 6-year-old, without the weight of disbelief that adults carried, without the need to explain or categorize. He simply looked, and the Nereid looked back at him, and something passed between them that Thalia could not quite see, only feel at the edge of her awareness, warm and simple and complete. "She is sad," Nikos said. "Is she afraid?" Thalia looked at the Nereid. The Nereid looked at Nikos. "No," the sound said. "Not anymore." "Not anymore," Thalia said. She began very carefully to cut. It took a long time. The net was old and strong, and it had wound itself cleverly, the way all things wind themselves that have no malice but simply follow their own logic wherever it takes them. She had to work slowly, feeling for where the filament lay against the Nereid's skin. Against her scales, the places where the two textures met and the net had bitten in, and cut in small, careful sections, easing each piece away before moving to the next. The Nereid was still throughout. Occasionally she made a sound. Not pain, Thalia thought, or not only pain, more like acknowledgement, like breath. Nikos sat beside Thalia and did not fidget, and did not complain, and did not ask to hold the knife, which was remarkable for a 6-year-old, and which told Thalia something about how seriously he was taking this. He had appointed himself, apparently, as the one who sat close enough that the Nereid could see him clearly, and he did this job with complete dedication, his dark eyes steady, his small face arranged into an expression of such earnest reassurance that Thalia's chest ached with love for him. "My grandmother told me stories about you," Thalia said as she worked. She said it quietly, not breaking the rhythm of the cutting. "About the Nereids, she said you tended these waters." The Nereid made a sound. "Yes," it said. "We did. We do." She said you knew us, the people of the island. We knew you, the sound said, and then something else. A phrase in that not language that carried layers of meaning, the way a piece of old music carries layers. Each time you listen, finding something you had not found before. Thalia sat with it for a moment, letting it settle. What she understood was something like, there was a time when you left bread and oil at the water's edge, on midsummer nights. Not all of you, not always, but enough. And we knew you were there. My grandmother did that, Thalia said softly. I remember. I thought it was... She paused, almost said superstition. Caught the word before it left her mouth. I thought it was an old custom, something from a long time ago. It was from a long time ago, the sound said. And it was also from last Tuesday, when your grandmother was still alive and living in this village. It is not so long ago as you might think. Thalia was quiet for a moment. She died 4 years ago, she said. Kyria Eleni. Something moved through the Nereid's expression. Something slow and genuine. I know, the sound said. The sea knew. She freed the last piece of net, just as the light shifted. The noon heat arriving, the shadows pulling back to huddle beneath the rocks. The water in the cove turning from green to a deep and luminous blue. The Nereid was very still for a moment after the last filament fell away, as if she were taking inventory of herself, checking that everything was still where it ought to be. Then she moved. It was not like watching an animal move, and it was not like watching a person move. It was like watching water decide to move, fluid and inevitable and completely without hesitation. Every part of her involved in it. The dark hair spreading through the water, the tail lifting and then drawing in, the whole of her easing back toward the depths of the cove with a slowness that was not weakness but ceremony, as if she were remembering how to be herself. She did not go all the way down. She stayed near the surface, in the green-blue shallows just beyond the rocks, and she turned and looked at them, at Thalia, and at Nikos again, and something in her gaze was different now, freed of the net and the long wait, fuller, somehow, more present. She made a sound. It moved through the cove like light. Thank you, it said, in all the ways that thank you can be said, in all the languages that have ever had a word for gratitude. And underneath it, something older and quieter, something that was less a word than a fact. I will remember you. Will you come back? Nikos asked. He had stood up, both feet at the very edge of the rock, leaning forward with his whole body. Will we see you again? The Nereid looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was unmistakably a smile. Look for me in the water, the sound said, when the light is this way. I will be where the light is. She dove. There was almost no sound, a displacement of water, a brief darkness in the depths of the cove, and then nothing. Nothing except the sea, exactly as it had always been, moving in its slow and ancient rhythm against the rocks, completely unimpressed by itself. Nikos stood very still for a moment. Then he looked down. There, on the rock where the Nereid had rested, where her hand had lain on the stone throughout the long, slow work of freeing her, was something that had not been there before. A shell, though not a shell exactly. It was the shape of a shell, a spiral the size of Nikos's palm. But its color was wrong, for any shell Thalia had ever found on this beach. It was the color of the deep water on a clear day, that particular shifting blue-green that had no name in any language she knew, that she had spent 43 years looking at without ever quite being able to hold it in her memory, the way you cannot hold the exact sound of someone's laugh. It held that color perfectly, as if it had been made of it, as if someone had reached into the sea and pulled out a handful of that unreachable blue and said, "Here, keep this." Nikos picked it up. He turned it in his hands. He held it up to the light, and the light moved through it in a way that light does not usually move through shells, finding colors inside the color, shifting as he shifted it. He looked at his mother. "She left it for me," he said. "Yes, she left it for you," Thalia said. He held it against his chest, both hands, the way he held things that mattered. They sat in a cove for a while after that, the two of them side by side on the warm rock in the noon light. There was no reason to hurry. The bread dough was resting under its cloth. The village was going about its afternoon, the square quiet in the heat, the taverna shuttered until evening, the cats asleep in the shadows. The world above the path was exactly what it had always been. Down here, in the small half-moon of the cove, with the water moving against the rocks and the smell of salt and warm stone and seaweed, something had changed, though Thalia could not have said precisely what. Nothing visible, nothing she could point to, only the sense that the air had been rearranged slightly, the way the air in a room is rearranged when someone important has just left it. Not empty, not diminished, but different. Aware of the leaving. "Mama," Nikos said. "Yes." "Will you tell me about great-grandmother Eleni?" Thalia looked at him. He was still holding the shell, turning it slowly in his hands, watching the light move in it. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he said, with the absolute sincerity of a 6-year-old, for whom that word still meant exactly what it said. Thalia was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the pistachios, the long gold rectangles of afternoon light on the stone floor. The smell of something always cooking, something with thyme and bay leaf, and the dried oregano that hung in bunches from the rafters. The sound of her grandmother's voice, low and unhurried, pulling stories out of the air the way a net pulls fish from the sea, not forcing, just knowing where to look. She was a small woman, Thalia began, with very large hands, and she knew everything about this island, everything. The rocks and the paths and the seasons and the sea. She knew them all the way you know a person you have loved for a very long time. Not by thinking about it, just by being near it long enough. Nikos leaned against her arm. Did she know about the Nereids? She did, Thalia said. She told me about them when I was not much older than you are now. And you believed her? Thalia thought about this honestly. Yes, she said, without question. The way you believe things when you are young, before you learn to make it difficult. And then you forgot? And then I forgot, she said. The way grown-ups forget things, not on purpose, just slowly. The way the path to this cove gets overgrown if you don't walk it. It doesn't disappear. It's still there. You just have to remember to walk it again. Nikos considered this. He turned the shell in his hands. I won't forget, he said. I know, Thalia said. I don't think you will." They walked back up the path in the early afternoon, the light beginning its long, slow lean toward gold, the heat still thick but softer now, the cicadas loud in the scrub above the boat shed. Thalia's hand around Nikos's, his shell held carefully in the other, pressed to his side. The village was beginning to stir, a door opening somewhere, a voice calling across a courtyard, the sound of a radio from the bakery, the smell of someone's lunch drifting from an open window, the lemon tree in the square casting its familiar shadow across the 3 tables. All of it exactly as it had always been, and all of it today, somehow more vivid, more particular, more itself. That evening, Thalia made bread. The loaf she had started that morning, finished now, golden from the oven, the crust cracking when she tapped it, in the way that meant it was right. She made a meal of it with olive oil and olives and the cheese from the woman who kept goats on the north side of the island, and she and Nikos ate at the small table by the window, with the sea visible between the houses, a line of deep blue in the last light. Nikos ate with one hand and held the shell with the other. He held it all through the meal. He held it when they moved to the old sofa afterward, when Thalia opened the window to let in the evening air, when the light changed from gold to rose to the deep, soft purple of full dusk, the first stars appearing over the water like something remembered. She told him more stories about Kyria Eleni as the evening cooled, about the island in the old times, about the things the old women had known. She found, as she talked, that she remembered more than she had thought she did, that the stories were still there, all of them, exactly as they had been, waiting in the same patient way, that everything her grandmother had given her had always waited. She had only needed to walk the path again. Nikos fell asleep against her shoulder, somewhere in the middle of a story about the way the sea changed color before a storm, and how Kyria Eleni had always known 3 days ahead of any weather that was coming. His breathing slowed and deepened, the small weight of him warm against her side, the shell still loosely held in his hand, that impossible blue-green color invisible now in the dim room, waiting for morning light to wake it. Thalia sat for a while without moving, the way she always did when he fell asleep against her, reluctant to disturb it, aware of the particular quality of the moment, the way it deserved to be stayed inside a little longer. Through the open window, the sea moved against the rocks at the base of the village with its old, unhurried sound. It had been making that sound when her grandmother was a girl, and her grandmother's grandmother before her. It would be making it long after all of them were gone, and the memory of them, and the memory of the memory. The sea was patient in a way that nothing else was patient. It did not forget. It did not overgrow. She thought about the Nereid in the deep water of the cove, moving freely now through the dark, through the rocks she knew better than any chart or map, through the particular currents of this particular sea that had been hers to tend since before the island had a name. She thought about what the Nereid had said. The sea knew about her grandmother's dying, and she found that it did not make her sad, exactly. It made her feel something harder to name, something adjacent to comfort. The sense that being known, really known, by something old enough and patient enough to hold it properly, was not nothing at all. She looked at the shell in her son's sleeping hand, the color of deep water, the color that had no name. Tomorrow, she thought, she would take him to the rock at the edge of the cove, the flat one, the one the sun hit first in the morning, and she would show him how to leave an offering. Nothing elaborate. What her grandmother had done. A little oil, a little bread. The simple acknowledgement of a presence that was there, whether or not you acknowledged it, but that noticed when you did. She would tell him what Kyria Eleni had told her. They know us, these waters. They know when we remember them and when we forget. And they would remember. Outside, the sea moved against the rocks. The stars settled into their places over the water. The cove was quiet in the dark, the ghost nets gone, the rocks bare and silver in the moonlight, the water moving through them with its old patient sound. And somewhere in the deep green of it, where the light would find her in the morning, when the light was right, something moved through the dark water with the ease of something long at home, tending the familiar shapes of rock and current and depth, keeping its old watch over the sleeping village on the hill, over the woman at the window and the small boy with the impossible shell, over all the long, unbroken thread of those who had lived here and loved here and known this water and been known by it in return. The sea kept its memory. The sea always had. Tonight we discovered that the old stories do not disappear. They wait, patient as the sea, for the moment we are ready to walk the path back to them. I hope that somewhere in your life there is a thread like that waiting for you. Something your grandmother knew, something you half remember, something that will still be there when you are ready to find it again. Rest now, dear wanderer. May the firefly's gentle glow guide you through the night.